In the heart of London, laughter mingles with history as Greg, the charismatic joker, unleashes a prank seemingly meant for harmless fun. But just as the crowd's chuckles fade, they morph into a collective gasp, igniting a fiery reckoning between entertainment and respect. When his reckless antics provoke the stoic royal guard, P. Anderson, what begins as a playful jest spirals into a moment of powerful confrontation, a test of integrity that challenges Greg's very identity. Will he rise to the occasion, or will he remain shackled by his ignorance, watched by a crowd ready to turn against him? The sun shone brightly in the heart of London, casting a golden hue over the bustling Trafalgar Square, where the historic Nelson's column loomed over the scattered crowd like a vigilant sentinel. Laughter reverberated off the stone walls, a cheerful mix of tourists snapping photos, street performers entertaining, and the distant sound of traffic weaving through the vibrant city atmosphere. The clear blue sky painted a perfect backdrop, while scents of roasted nuts and fish and chips wafted through the air, adding to this lively tableau. Amidst the kaleidoscope of colors, vendors shouted their wares, inviting visitors to partake in the spirit of London, encapsulating its lively energy and deep-rooted history. In the midst of this vivid landscape stood Greg, a self-proclaimed joker with tousled dark hair and a mischievous glint in his hazel eyes. In his late 20s, he was the embodiment of youthful exuberance, always seeking validation through entertainment. Clad in a faded graphic tee and jeans, he exuded a laid-back charm, often relying on humor as his social currency. Yet Greg had a habit of pushing the boundaries of acceptable fun, often oblivious to the fine line between amusement and offense. Today was just another day to showcase his penchant for humor in the most unconventional ways, seeking the thrill of laughter and camaraderie from his close-knit circle of friends who teased him about his wild ideas but ultimately loved his carefree spirit. Among his friends was Mark, the cautious voice in their tight group, a slight frown etched onto his face as he watched Greg with a mix of admiration and concern. "You really shouldn't mess with the guards, Greg," Mark warned, eyeing the stoic figure of a royal guard standing near the fountain. P. Anderson, in full regalia, a soldier crowned in a tall bearskin hat, standing resolute and unmoving. The uniform shone in the sunlight, adorned with intricate details that spoke of traditions held sacred. "Relax, Mark. Lighten up. He's just standing there like a statue. I bet he could use a good laugh." Greg laughed, dismissing the growing tension simmering in the air, his friends chuckling reluctantly at the prospect of what he was concocting in his mind. The thrill and prospect of attention fueled him as he envisioned the roar of laughter from his friends and tourists alike. Greg's eyes danced mischievously, inspiration struck as he approached the guard. "Let's give him something to remember us by," he declared theatrically. Reaching for a nearby bottle, he filled it with water from the fountain, glancing back at his friends who were starting to realize the risk of his antics. Greg, maybe don't—" Mark's voice trailed off, but it was lost in the momentum of Greg's bravado. With an exaggerated flourish and a knack for drama, Greg sidled up to Anderson, who remained as impassive as a portrait. "Hope you're thirsty," he shouted, tilting the bottle and dousing the guard's pristine uniform with the cool water. A ripple of laughter erupted from the onlookers, initially taken by the humorous intent. Yet a collective gasp soon followed as the cheers faltered, leaving the air thick with an uneasy tension. Anderson's dark eyes, typically unreadable, narrowed ever so slightly in response to the affront. The joy in the square dampened as tourists exchanged glances, uncertain whispers filling the space. Some began shaking their heads, clearly disapproving, while others raised their phones to capture the moment, the irony of a prank gone too far looming heavily. Realizing the shift in atmosphere, Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Greg, seriously, this isn't funny anymore," he warned, his voice barely cutting through the silence that enveloped them. The laughter was replaced by murmurs of discontent, revealing a brewing storm beneath the surface. Greg sensed the change but was swept up in the thrill of the moment. "Oh, come on, lighten up. It's just a bit of fun," he called out, but his words were drowned out by the visibly uncomfortable expressions of those around him. His playful jest was turning into an unintentional provocation. As the water dripped down Anderson's uniform, A murmur of disapproval began to swell within the crowd. Even Greg, with his swagger and charisma, felt a slight chill creep up his spine, a flicker of doubt, a sense of the line he'd crossed without understanding its weight. He stepped back, feeling the collective disapproval of strangers, all watching and awaiting his next move, unsure whether he would brave the consequences of his choice or retreat into the shadows of regret. As the last remnants of laughter dissipated into the humid summer air of Trafalgar Square, the crowd's mood shifted palpably. Greg, still chuckling at his own prank, finally took a moment to glance at the royal guard, P. Anderson. The guard stood immovable, the water now draping off him like the weight of judgment. Greg's heart raced. Laughter usually bred confidence in him, but a flicker of doubt began to creep in. He had crossed a line, and the transition from humor to something more solemn was evident in the murmurs cascading through the crowd. "Just look at him! He's a statue," Greg quipped, his bravado waning as some in the audience murmured disapproval. "Aren't you supposed to be brave? Maybe you need a splash to wake you up." The laughter that lingered before was now mixed with shuffles of discomfort, a growing chorus of quiet condemnation that made Greg's gut twist. "Greg, come on, that's enough," came the voice of Mark, his friend ever so eager to distance himself from the unfolding disaster. "You can't just mess with someone like that. He's a guard for a reason." Mark's brow was knitted with concern, his tone cutting through Greg's self-enthrallment. The playful audience he had imagined seemed to wobble, tilting away from him as the gravity of tradition dawned. "Nah, lighten up. It's all in good fun," Greg shot back, waving his hand dismissively, but the reassurances he sought crumbled, like the very water he'd poured, disappearing before his eyes. Anderson, still as a marble statue, continued sharing his silence. But Greg could feel the guard's energy in the air, shifting from an object of ridicule to a palpable force of dignity, inexorably drawing the line between comedy and respect. "Respect?" came a bold voice from the crowd, breaking through the discontent. An older woman stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "You think it's fun demeaning someone who stands for our history? Show some respect, you clueless child." Greg froze, the warmth of laughter evaporating as heat rushed to his cheeks. The familiar sting of embarrassment licked at him, and for the first time, he regarded Anderson as something more than an embarrassing target. He was a keeper of a legacy, unwavering amidst Greg's childish antics. "Funny man, huh? Is making jokes worth making someone feel small?" she continued firmly, confronting Greg as if commanding an audience in a theater. In that moment, the crowd buzzed with a shared sense of sanctity towards their royal guard, now intimately aware of his significance. Instead of laughter, accusations began to fill the air. "No one's laughing now, are they?" another voice chimed, a younger man at the back with arms crossed, frowning at Greg's recklessness. "You think it's okay to mess with someone just because they're in a silly hat?" Greg felt a swell of uncertainty, the cheers of his previous bravado crumbling into underlying tension. He had never intended to provoke disdain. He wanted applause, a catchy video to share. But something deeper shifted inside him, a churning need to reconcile with the truth embedded within the crowd's reprimands. Had he truly thought humor was worth this level of disrespect? "Ah, come on, you all are being too serious. It's just a joke," Greg spluttered, trying to regain his footing in a rapidly changing narrative. His laughter sounded hollow even to his ears, the words rattling out without conviction. A brilliant flash of color caught his eye. The vibrant red and gold of the Royal Guard's uniform stark against the muted tones of tourists who now turned their backs, their disdain evident as they moved away from the spectacle. Fear started to worm its way into Greg's chest. He was losing not only their attention, but their respect, something he never understood mattered until now. With a sweeping glance at the tightening circle of onlookers, he saw something that unnerved him deeply. The crowd wasn't just a bunch of indifferent bystanders. They were quite united, and that unity resembled a barrier, a protectorate standing firm between Greg and the very line he'd crossed. The memory of the guard's stoic posture glanced through his mind like an anchor, reminding him of warmth he had taken for granted. Just as he leaned forward to break the tension with a half-hearted joke to lighten the mood, A nicker pierced the air from the royal guard's horse. Startled, the powerful animal shifted restlessly, its instincts reacting to the churning energy around them. A sudden burst of panic surged through Greg as he recognized that his antics had inadvertently provoked the horse. Whoa! A ripple of fear swept through the crowd. The horse jerked, rear legs gathering tension and muscles rippling underneath a glossy coat. Greg's distracted body sprang back to reflex as he stumbled, a miscalculation of gravity sending him crashing to the ground even as the horse reared and neighed, the world swirling in chaos around him. Gasps and screams filled the square, and Greg's heart dropped, not from the shock of pain, but from the real and crushing understanding that struck alongside it. He had put himself in direct opposition to not just a guard, but centuries of tradition, wisdom, and dignity. The crowd had turned. He felt their judgment descending like a shroud, heavy and relentless. What have I done? Greg gasped, staring at the intense scene unfolding. Anderson still steadfast and calm, but now the undercurrent of tension threatened to sweep him under. Would he recognize this folly in himself? As he stared at Anderson, a question lingered unanswered in his mind. How could one moment of foolishness lead to a painful reckoning of self-worth and respect? As Greg lay sprawled on the cobblestones, the laughter of the crowd echoed around him. But it was different this time, charged with a heavy, unsettling justice that felt like a fist tightening around his throat. He looked up to see P. Anderson, still standing tall and unmoving like a pillar of history. The onlookers who had once chuckled now observed him with a mix of pity and scorn, their eyes narrowed with disapproval. Greg's heart raced, a mix of disbelief and embarrassment swirling inside him, threatening to spill over. "Get up, you clown!" a voice shouted from the crowd, harsh and clear, cutting through the buzz of whispers. Greg winced at the confrontation. He had thought he was the star of the show, but now he felt more like a fool on display. Each breath was a struggle, not just from the fall, but from the realization that he had crossed a line without even recognizing it. P. Anderson, their silent sentinel, had not moved an inch, his expression unreadable as the horse beside him snorted impatiently. That animal, a powerful emblem of regal authority, was an extension of the guard's unwavering nature. Greg's gaze flickered between Anderson and his horse, a silent acknowledgement that he had brought this chaos upon himself. A true lesson about respect that he had ignored for too long. "Why would you disrespect him like that?" Someone else from the crowd chimed in, clearly frustrated by Greg's antics. "He's not just a statue to mock, he stands for something much more significant." The words struck Greg harder than he expected, their weight crashing down on him like a wave, forcing him to question his perceptions and motivations. His pulse pounding, Greg struggled to his feet, dirt smudged on his cheek as he tried to regain some semblance of dignity. "I just wanted to make people laugh," he stammered, his voice sounding hollow even to his ears. The crowd's disapproval was a palpable wall he had built around himself, and it looked to him like all the warmth he once felt was now frozen solid. Anderson's posture remained rigid, a contrast to Greg's noticeable vulnerability. In that silence, a flicker of insight sparked within Greg. He realized laughter at another's expense was not the mark of a true comedian. The most genuine humor came from understanding rather than mocking. "I'm sorry," he breathed out finally, more to himself than anyone else, as the murmurs quieted. It was a small step, yet in that crossroads of judgment and contemplation, Greg embraced a critical turning point. He approached Anderson, steadier this time. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I thought it was harmless, but I see now what I've done." Greg extended a hand toward the guard, a gesture of contrition and connection, hoping perhaps for an understanding that he could carry forward, a moment of respect that would light the path to his redemption. As Greg rose from the ground, the laughter of the crowd faded into an uneasy silence, filled with anticipation for his next move. Determined to transform his embarrassment into a lesson learned, he approached Anderson, his heart racing. I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with sincerity. The guard, still maintaining his stoic demeanor, looked down at Greg, a blend of authority and patience etched across his face. "I didn't realize how disrespectful I was being." Greg continued, his embarrassment replacing any bravado he had moments ago. I thought I was being funny, but I see now that I was just foolish. The crowd, sensing the gravity of his words, mulled in a mix of empathy and approval as Anderson's stern expression softened slightly. Respect is not something you play with, Anderson finally replied, his deep voice commanding yet calm. Every tradition holds a story, a history woven into its fabric. I'm glad you see that now. Days turned into weeks, and Greg became a regular at the square, not as a joker, but as an advocate for respect and humor. He shared his story, warning others about the same pitfalls he had faced. Through his transformation, he discovered that laughter need not come at the expense of others, and that understanding the weight of one's actions often offers the richest form of entertainment. The square remained a joyful setting, but now laughter mingled with respect, creating a vibrant tapestry of community interaction.